all of our state. That's okay. I'll give you these excellent notes later. Then I think it builds confidence for our cities, our counties, state and federal agencies and tribes. They can have more confidence leaning on the work that we do, knowing that we have all this input from the roundtable. So thank you for sitting up front in your little table tents that I designated for you today. And I did want to just kind of talk about what comes next for the roundtable once we finish this strategic planning process for recreation. And so I'm taking this from our charter and kind of paraphrasing it. So the roundtable can bring ideas and concerns and opportunities from the roundtable itself or from the general public for consideration. And that would get handed to the executive committee. And then the executive committee takes a look at things and says, you know, is this within our scope or not? And then feeds it back to the roundtable and says, no, we're not going to consider this issue or this opportunity because it's not in our scope, or yes, please do consider it. And then when the roundtable looks at something, you will discuss it and try to come to consensus around whatever the issue that's being discussed is. And even if consensus isn't reached, we're looking for a majority, and then we will preserve any minority viewpoints because we really do want to know what the different viewpoints are of things. So once that consensus or that majority is reached, then that gets fed back to the executive committee, and then the executive committee takes all that work that the roundtable did and makes recommendations to the government agencies based on what the roundtable has found. So it's a huge part of how this all stays connected from the ground up. So I'm really grateful to everyone who participates from the roundtable. I again invite you to, you know, speak up if you have questions, if you don't understand, if you have concerns. Speak up in the meeting today as we're going through the draft and on. And then I thought I would just take a couple of hypothetical examples of how things might work for the roundtable after strategic planning. Let's say one of the local trails groups goes to Tom at the Forest Service and says, hey, we want to put in this new trail network in X area. Tom and the Forest Service might choose to come to the coalition to get some input. And so the way that would work is that the roundtable would discuss all of the different facets of this trail, you know, proposed trail idea, and then be able to feed that back to the executive committee, and the executive committee can feed that back to the agency. And so we're not in any way saying we're doing NEPA. We're not analyzing it in that way. It's just a way to give agencies non-binding input from a large range of stakeholders about a proposed project. So that's one way that the roundtable could be acting in the future. Another kind of way that could work is that maybe someone from the general public has an idea or a concern. They submit that to our website, which we're working on a button where you can submit things, or a roundtable member themselves might have an idea. Let's say it's for a festival. I know we threw around some ideas for a festival last time we met. So the festival idea gets brought to the executive committee, and the executive committee says, hey, yeah, let's look at this. The roundtable goes back, talks about it in detail, looks at the different issues, opportunities from it, and feeds it back up the line to the executive committee. Executive committee takes that to whatever agencies or other entities might be involved. So those are just two hypothetical project level things that could happen with the roundtable.
And just to be clear, it's not removing some of these existing things that we have, people that are really heavily involved in forest service issues. So it's just yet another opportunity for the public to have a body, in this case, the coalition, to vet some of these projects through. But we still continue to really value those relationships we have with our partners and our permit holders, for instance.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that in time, and I will, call you in just a sec, Chad. I wanted to go back to that as well too. There's, in no way are we getting in the middle of those existing partnerships. It's just a way, one way that agencies can get feedback about ideas. It's not to redo something or recreate the wheel or duplicate something that someone else is already doing or a group is already doing, you know, not fixing something that's not broken. So thank you.
Yeah.
Chad?
Just a logistical question. So I guess I was under the understanding that the roundtable members were gonna meet for a certain number of meetings for this strategic plan. So is this gonna be on an as need basis, or then we're gonna have regular meetings coming? So that, yeah, that's my question.
You're committed till you die, Chad. You've heard that one.
He wants to live a little longer.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I'm not sure that I can fully answer that question right now. Michelle, do you have any input on that?
Yeah, we kind of talked about that a little bit. I think after this planning process is complete, which we're near.
Yeah.
Then it would be great for the roundtable to make that decision together, whether you meet quarterly, whether you meet twice a year. And maybe some of that has to do with the amount of feedback that we get. If we start getting input, through a submission button on the website and or, you know, people come to you personally and, you know, want to broach something and topics, and if it feels like there's enough content to be able to meet like every 2 months, I feel like that should be a kind of a group decision.
Okay.
But then set it, so that you all have the same expectation that you know you're gonna meet every 2 months, or you're gonna meet once a quarter. And that just makes it easier for everyone to keep it organized.
So like I said, until you pass away, Chad, you're part of it.
There's no end.
It's coming.
Bill juice.
Okay, that is all I had for this introduction piece here. Do we want to jump into the strategic planning now or talk about the mapping for a moment?
Well, we have it as. Are you okay to do the mapping? Where?
Sure.
Yeah, at the end, is that okay, or do you wanna do it now?
Whenever you guys want. If what you can just.
We just wanted to give you a quick update on kind of where we are. I mean, it'll only take a few minutes, so I'll pull it up for you if you wanna do it now.
Okay.
So we can look at it. So give me un momento.
Yes, while she's pulling that up, most of you have had some introduction to this, but this is just essentially a GIS tool that depicts, it's a wildlife habitat sensitivity tool across the Montelores area. So this is a combination of a lot of different GIS layers for a lot of different wildlife species that CPW monitors, some of these are Forest Service layers as well. Maybe some Park Service layers too, US Fish and Wildlife Service layers. But anyway, this is a composite, you can go ahead to the next slide there. Essentially, it produces a composite GIS map of all of the different GIS layers we have for wildlife species within the Montelores area. So this is just a screenshot of a lot of the different GIS layers that go into the model. I think we have a total of 35 or so inputs or GIS layers in the model, and then the model lays all of these on top of each other with some scoring and ranking, and produces it's basically just a sensitivity map of wildlife habitat across the geographic area. And it can then be broken out seasonally as well, so we can evaluate potential recreation impacts on both summer wildlife habitats, as well as winter wildlife habitats. And not surprisingly, a lot of the most critical wildlife habitats during the summer are also the same places where we all want to recreate, right? It's the high country, it's places where elk are having their calves, deer are having their fawns. It's also, you know, it's the same places we want to be in the summer. And then in the winter, So I guess just to back up for a second, the red highlighted areas are the most critical, the most sensitive areas. Going down towards blue as the least sensitive. And then the white being, areas where we don't have any data for that area, or there's no layers that overlap that area.
Kind of one comment, just to give everybody an idea, so when we have recently developed new trails, especially in these high country areas, we have put timing restrictions on those trails. In order to accommodate or support some of the cabbing component that goes on up there.
Yeah, so you bet. I think that's one of the really critical uses of these maps is for timing restrictions, and evaluating, seasonal closures or whatever. So the map on the left is kind of highlights the critical, the upper left there kind of highlights the critical, summer range, or summertime wildlife habitats, and then the map on the lower right highlights
Hang on, sorry, I don't think there's something online.
the more sensitive winter time habitats, and again, not surprisingly, it's a lot of the areas where we want to recreate during those same time periods. So it's just kind of a tool that can be used for us to evaluate recreation projects as they're proposed, or be able to evaluate sensitive wildlife habitat areas seasonally. If you go to the next slide, and so then we took all of the existing legal roads and trails existing within the Montelores area, which is what shows up here, and then overlaid it. Next slide. Just overlaid it with that sensitivity map. So this is kind of where we are currently. I think this is going to be an evolving mapping process and program. I think we can make edits to this as we go. There may be times where maybe we want to add other wildlife habitat layers in here that don't currently exist within the model, or remove some for some reason. CPW also, we redo our mapping every 4 years. So every 4 years, we go through an exercise of evaluating these GIS layers and making additions or changes to them. So it will change with that time period as well. One other thing I should highlight, a lot of the Ute Mountain Ute lands don't show up in these maps as critical wildlife habitat areas. That's not, it's not because they're not, it's because CPW doesn't have jurisdiction over them and doesn't survey them, doesn't map them. So a lot of the Ute Mountain Ute lands are not really included within this model, and they show up as white, and that doesn't mean that they're not valuable wildlife habitats. It just means that CPW doesn't have jurisdiction to survey them or map them.
But anecdotally, they would be good, it would be good habitat because.
Sure, probably, yeah, okay, probably so.
What about the upcoming CNHP wildlife or biodiversity study? Will that help on tribal lands to sort of gather some
It
data?
could, yeah, I don't know who all, to be honest, I don't know if CNHP, I don't know who all has GIS layers for tribal lands. CPW really does not. To be honest, I don't know who has layers for tribal lands.
And a lot of times they don't share that information, Brock can attest, working down there. They just don't want to share like sensitive data. And at Mesa Verde, they don't even really want to show locations of past Mexican spotted owl sensitive plants just across the boundary. They're concerned about that information maybe being misused or misinterpreted. So they're really cautious about releasing data.
Right.
So we may never see data from them.
Yeah.
But if this tool could be available to them, so they can put in their own data for internal use, that might be a good way for them to work on this landscape effort.
Just curious, because I think it's the CTO that is pushing out that co-tracks trails. Is this something that might be good to share with them for education of like? I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah.
I've never used CoTrack, or haven't used it yet.
What?
I know, I'm sorry, but I just go on my same trails all the time.
All right, peanut gallery.
Yeah, I think it can be, that's a good question.
Yeah.
So CoTrex, which is Colorado Trails Explorer, or something like that.
Trail Explorer, yes.
And then Codex, which is Colorado,
That's the biodiversity one,
Data, maybe Explorer.
yeah, probably Data
It's a
Explorer.
database.
Anyway, Cotrex and Codex, we've worked pretty closely with them. They're aware of these models
Okay,
already.
yeah.
We worked pretty closely with them on developing these. You can actually go into Codex and produce a very similar map to this through Codex, because they use a lot of the same layers that we do. And so through Codex, if you go on the website, you can produce kind of your own like sensitivity maps almost, or data layer maps that actually look pretty similar to this model. So I would say they're very similar, and we've certainly talked to them, and they're aware of this model, and they use a lot of the same layers that we use. What else was I gonna say? Anyway, I guess there's questions. There's something else I was gonna say, but this is kind of where we're at. I think this is an evolving thing. You know, as Tom was mentioning, this doesn't replace NEPA or anything like that. This is just kind of a high level tool that we can use to evaluate potential projects or, you know, wildlife habitat improvement projects or whatever. And then, you know, if there was a specific project proposed or an area we wanted to look at, then we'd want to drill down a little deeper and kind of evaluate that on more of like a, you know, a side-by-side basis, just like we already do. But
So just a thought or a question, both. It seems like in a lot of our previous discussions, we talked about educating the public at trailheads and that sort of thing. So this is obviously, like you just said, high level. Can we do a dummies 101 sort of version that we could put in public information? I think the more that the public understands why an area is sensitive, right?
Chad, I can speak to that really quickly with the Colorado Welcome Center that we oversee and administer, and with CTO, who's an integral part of what we do every day. The way they see it is, it's the job of the Welcome Center or the Visitor Service Centers or the places that people are gonna stop and have a conversation to help people understand why they should disperse from that area, as opposed to putting it out, because they find that people, just like when they go pot hunting, they're looking for places to see animals calving, or they're looking to see places where they shouldn't be. And it's kind of the opposite, and this has been a trend for what, 15, 20 years now with the state. So that's something to think about. But as far as getting the information into the people's hands, yes, if you stop by the Welcome Center, you want to recreate up at one of these areas, we will look at this information. If it's not the right time for that, we're going to do our best to talk you into some other areas and to disperse that widely. But that's not a great answer. That's just how we've been making it work right now. And I had a question too. You did such a great job on these maps. I appreciate that. This was last year, 24, mostly when this was going on, if I remember correctly. So will it be 28 when the next one's?
correct, the GIS layers will be updated again in 28.
In 28, will you count on that? Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
You know, I think Forest Service could do a little better job on including some of this information on our kiosks. You know, we have little blurbs down at the cemetery and the feed kiosks, but we don't have anything up at Ryman, for instance. Sure. So.
And I would like to ultimately see this go into, you know, some sort of document, like a recreation planning document that can be distributed, you know, throughout the community and to different stakeholder groups and other counties, other partnerships have done that, created kind of these recreation management plans where these maps would be included in there. If anybody wants more information, I can certainly send that out. We've got a packet that kind of dives into the details of this and how it's created and all of that, the GIS layers that go into it. And there's some layers we left out because we just didn't feel like the data was adequate or different things like that. And so if anybody wants to see that packet with more information, I can send that out, that document.
This question is for Tom. You mentioned that you have seasonal closures in the high country. Could you tell us what those are? Or I think that's sort of something that would be good for.
Yeah, we have seasonal closures in the Ryman Creek area, which is downstream of Rico. And that's, correct me if I'm wrong, June 1st to July 15th for elk production.
Okay,
We have closures over in the Black Mesa area that more so, Black Mesa, Groundhog Mountain, Lone Cone, that northwest part of the district. That above Groundhog Reservoir, those are to accommodate, hunting activity in that area, and those closures are only for, mechanized use in there, so we close trails down in that area. We go back, Ryman closure is to any heartbeats at all that we have there. Same thing on the McPhee Overlook Trail, it starts right outside of Dolores, nobody behind a gate on Forest Service land, and again, that's critical winter range out there. That goes from December 1st to May 15th, May 1st, I should say. Similar closure in the House Creek area. And that again, that December 1st to April 1st is for, May 1st, I'm sorry, is for, critical winter range.
yeah, so is that information being spread? Like, how do you get that information?
Signage, but we don't have that inter part, we have some inter panels, at a couple of our trailheads that explain the importance of these April 1st, December 1st to April 1st closure. But they're two separate blurbs,
Okay.
But we're throwing a lot of information at people, and when you have 3 panels full of information, 10% of it gets read.
Right.
So, our messaging has to be brief, succinct, and clear.
This has been a great discussion. It sounds like there's definitely a lot of interest in this map, and this mapping process. I think we can circle back to this.
Yeah.
Because it's an evolving process, and it sounds like there's some interest for some more education pieces around it. So we'll come back to it, but I do want to get to our main agenda item today, which is working on our strategic plan. So I'm just gonna ask us to table this for now. Definitely, if anybody has questions, like email amongst yourself, email me, I can, facilitate that discussion. But I'm gonna have Gabe jump in with what he's got prepared today. I hate to shut this down, but I know we have a lot to do. So I'm gonna move us forward.
Okay. Well, so here we are. We got all the draft goals and strategies from grinding through, 4 meetings now, something like that? Not bad, we got pretty good material for 4 meetings. But this is just a chance to like look at the whole thing, and some people got into the Google Doc and made some comments, and that's great. That'll kind of help us maybe get started on it, but I don't want anybody to think that if you didn't do your homework, you can't participate. This is not high school. We're not practicing anymore. This is real life, so we can really go by what you think. But I sort of I think if people are okay with it, that I would sort of start with some of the comments that people made on the Google Doc, because I think they're pertinent in that I kind of went through, I had questions building up the whole time I was doing this, because I was scribing really. I mean, I didn't really like go ad lib much. I might have done some, but I tried not to. So most of it really just came from discussions in here, and I was interpreting it. And so that's part of the job, is just to like make sure when we look back at it that like, if one of these things was your idea and it's not quite expressed the way your idea was, you can even just say that it's not really what I thought. Some hints about what you were really thinking would be good, but I can even work with that. It's like, not right, go back to your notes, buddy. So I think we'll start there with, just looking at some of these comments.
Can you zoom in, please? If we can show.
Oh, sure, yeah, I can zoom in. Yeah, I can zoom. I've got 2 different things going on here, so. Like that?
That's so much better.
Okay.
Much better.
Good. Okay, so I'm gonna be going back. I might just be a little bit choppy here because I'm looking at a lot of different things, but with these first 2, the first goal, like I really felt like we had to have one goal about our impacts on each other. So that, I mean, this is a little bit selfish and not altruistic. Like, I want to have a good time and I don't want people in my way, kind of thing. And we hear that pretty much not in those words, but we definitely like have heard that at a lot of meetings. And so that's part of it, and I think it's gotta be part of this plan, because it's part of the values that we picked up throughout the process. And then there's goal 1.2, which is about managing impacts on resources. So they're I noticed that in the Google comments, we want to be merging them. And I could be convinced on that, but like, I think it's nice to have things, categorized out a little bit. They're definitely related. So, a plan like this, you can have goals. You don't want conflicting goals, but you can have goals that relate intimately with one another. The idea is just to separate out the thoughts and get those written down. The context, once you have a strategy written, it belongs in this plan. And so we do have maintained the strategic nature of this plan. That what most of these statements, they're not really policy statements, they're about what we're gonna do about it. The goals are sort of what we want to achieve, but we're not trying to set policy for the land agencies or for any other, outdoor recreation managers. We're just trying to express a plan of action from here and frame that. So the first comment I thought was interesting was about accommodating. And so, Alex Krebs wrote, I'm having there seems to be a contradiction between accommodating more visitors and sort of maintaining the status quo for us. And then Helen actually, I like a.
Can you scroll up? Because I think we're talking about.
Oh, sorry.
Right? Yeah,
I've got a lot of different.
yeah, you've got a lot going on.
So there you go.
Okay, so we're talking about 1.1.1.
Yeah.
1.1.2. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So that is, that's the gist of it. And then I think, Helen had a comment about, this is more about sort of planning for not overuse, for making sure that we don't overuse. And then there was some, so I think that's kind of the first thing is like, are we comfortable with you have sort of competing forces here, right? We're saying this is a balancing act between accommodating visitors and not degrading our own experience. So I think Alex was kind of like, are we setting ourselves up to not be able to implement it? Like, are we setting ourselves up for failure here with this? Like, should this be stated more realistically, I guess? I just thought I would raise that and see whether we need to reword it or.
I wonder if we should say, because the goal is not to accommodate more outdoor visitors, the goal is to prepare, right, for the potential of more outdoor visitors.
To prepare for the influx.
Yeah, but it might not come, but by preparing, we're still protecting and stewarding our land. So maybe prepare, I don't know if that's the right verb, but because.
Prepare for growth in? An increase in, or is it just prepare for outdoor recreation visitors from outside of the region? That's what you're saying, change the verb from accommodate to prepare for.
Accommodate outdoor recreation visitation increase.
Yeah, you'd be okay with that, too.
Yeah, I think accommodate's the right action word there. I don't necessarily change that, but I see where you're going with the direction, and we can.
Yeah, if we use prepared, that assumes that there hasn't been degradation already.
Oh, good point.
How do we address that?
Good point.
Okay, so that's pretty good on that then, huh? Okay, so one of the things was, there were some questions about it wasn't clear, it was a call for clarification on the one about solitude.
I was the one that made that comment. what do we mean by that? If I go to Hawkins Preserve, I'm not expecting solitude. If I go to the wilderness, maybe that's a different, so like, I just felt like we needed to clarify that, and what does solitude mean? Like, when I lived in Alaska, if there was one person on the trail, I'd turn around and go the other way. Now I've upped that to 3 cars, right? Because it's Colorado, we have a little bit more than Alaska. So it's just like, I feel like solitude is too wishy-washy. I don't know what we mean.
As a former Alaskan and someone who's been with you in the preserve, I have to say, those elements of solitude can be found in those places. And who are we to say that you're not gonna find that, or you can't look for that there? So maybe it's the aspects or the elements of that, but I think that somehow keeping that, solitude, because when you ask people in the intercept surveys, and when we do the ones at the Welcome Center, people are like, I'm looking for solitude, I'm looking for that break, I want that reset for my mental and for my psyche, so.
I understand, and like on an emotional level, I get it, but on a, like, this is a strategy, I want clear, measurable outcomes, and I want goals that move towards that. So I agree with you on the emotional
Okay,
aspect.
but then what would you change solitude?
I don't know.
I have a suggestion, and Tom, maybe you can chime in on this. I know in the forest planning process, we looked at areas that had those values. And I don't know if there's certain wording in the forest plan or maybe in the BLM or plan that has already kind of ironed out the wording and the intention and the definition of these things.
Solitude is really only a driving factor in wilderness areas, so we don't really. Obviously, we all want a trail experience where we have some semblance of solitude or lack of being busy, but we don't really quantify. We only qualify solitude in wilderness settings like Winter Jet or even places like that, so.
So the extreme end of that is.
Yes, yeah. And so solitude is not really a management tool for non-wilderness areas.
I think that's actually kind of heavy in a way, for
Kind of
what, for, it's like, it's sort of that's a very significant management approach, I think, given what this strategy says. So it's saying, and one of the other comments on this was like, okay, so if we want solitude, then are we spreading out? Which is a concern, right?
Right.
Solitude means fewer density of people. So if we say this, minimize the loss of opportunities for solitude, and we just mean it generally, we might be disappointing ourselves. Like, there could be some places that aren't busy today that are gonna get more busy. Like, aqueducts, man, you can like have solitude in aqueducts right now, but that is too good. It's not gonna be like that for long.
Yeah.
One, couple more seasons and then it's gonna be.
And note that solitude in this case, we may lose that, if we like it or not, because of not only visitation, but we're gonna focus people into certain areas in order to benefit some of the habitat that, that Jamin's bringing out as an important resource to our wildlife population around here, so. Is this a conservation effort or is this a recreation effort? It's a little bit of both, right? Yeah. Right.
Yes.
And maybe, just, I don't know, I like this idea, and I don't wanna lose my solitude however I find it. But maybe we take out that goal, because it's conflicting, it sounds like, between conservation and spreading out, like that.
Well,
But then we open
I would say no.
Okay.
Open ourselves up for people to say, you guys didn't think about that, you didn't care.
Because that's a value that.
A lot of people have, right, that's.
If you take a look at the fact that, go down to 1.1.4, develop new access and trails. We can still do that in these high use rec areas, in fact, we already did it in the boggy system where we stacked a lot of trails within an area. Focusing on a high use rec area while not spreading out into other parts of the forest, where we don't have a lot of development, where we have good habitat. Like that, I think we are approaching, we're heavily trailed, heavily roaded in this area.
Yeah, under the intelligent containment philosophy.
Yeah.
Described.
Maybe the thing we need to do is to state it instead of minimizing loss, we're actually talking about managing areas for solitude, continuing to manage areas for solitude.
I was thinking both that strategy and the next one are both sort of in the negative and like switching the verbiage a little bit to be more positive, I think.
Strategic and positive. I don't know how exactly, so with the
There's
wilderness
tools in the
thing.
toolbox, right? Like if you wanted to qualify it by thinking through permit requirements, right? Or by retaining wilderness for such purposes.
Retain, that's.
I like that word.
That was awesome. Nice pull.
Yeah, we hear a lot about solitude from like quiet use coalitions. I don't know how active they are on this board, but yeah, so, yeah, you hear a lot about it from quiet use coalitions and, you know, I think solitude might even mean, like, to some groups, that might even just mean like non-motorized or something. So it kind of depends on the definition, but it's something we hear about a lot.
Well, why don't you just put in a couple of, synonyms with solitude? It can be peace and quiet, it can be detachment from crowds, those are synonyms. But solitude, just throw in a couple of clarifiers and positive.
Self-discovery, reflection.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, we're trying to maximize those types of things.
We're trying to maximize opportunities for those.
Yeah, that's opportunity.
Would we?
We're trying.
Wait, I think that kind of ignores the point that we were talking about when we first introduced some of the ideas around this strategy and why it might be conflicting, which is it doesn't matter how we really qualify it or define solitude if we're trying to retain these opportunities for solitude as the resource diminishes. The only way to really do that is to continue providing that dispersion and degrading wildlife habitat, I feel like. But I know we like changing the word to retain. I feel like that's hard to control because more people are going to use trails. We don't have control over that number. The only thing we have control over is more trails, which I think is like in the face of that conservation element with regard to the strategy.
Well, the more trails thing is also, it might be a conflicting value, but it's real.
Yeah.
And it's part of this. I mean, we have that too. We have to live with both of them, I think.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that we have to have solitude on those trails. I guess is what I'm saying. At the cost of, the other efforts of this. I think that is maybe the happy ground is that we sacrifice a little bit of solitude for our recreation needs so that those anthropogenic sorts of qualities that we have available to us with the wildlife habitat are retained. I guess this goal in particular seems contrary to the multi-use goal of the partnership.
What if we changed it to something like retain opportunities for personal or for quiet use or solitude? All the things, while maintaining, like whatever Alex just said, I'm not as eloquent. Cause I personally, I tend to agree with Alex. It's like, if I knew that an animal is being stressed or environment is being stressed, I would rather see another human on the trail. I can deal with that.
A little bit of this goes back to part of the reason I queued this up at the beginning by pointing out goal 1.1 and 1.2 is that this is a balancing act. Like we have people that want to recreate. They're not going to stop wanting to recreate. They're major customers. They live here. They visit here. So there's no getting rid of people. And also part of public land management is management for people. And then there's the part of the resources, and that's like part of the balancing act. And so the way I dealt with that was to separate them into two goals. And so it's a comfort level of, and we have a statement like this, and then also in goal 1.2, pad the impacts, address the impacts straight on. I don't think it's a I mean, in my mind, it isn't so much a contradiction, it's just that it's hard to do. You gotta think about a lot of things. This is why Tom is like this a lot of times, like, dude, how do we solve these things?
Well, solitude, really came out of the fact that when I go park in the parking lot, I want two cars there. When I get on the trail, I'm not seeing anybody.
Yeah,
Because when we use terms like quiet use,
yeah, that's a different thing.
honestly, the motorized
Yeah.
users are gonna say, well, wait, what about us?
Yeah.
So solitude really evolved from just wanting to maintain this low use that we already have on our system here, because we all love going and having plenty of parking spaces, midweek at a local trail.
So I can find solitude on my snowmobile or my ATV or
Right.
my horseback. You know,
Yeah, right, yeah, so I would strike out quiet use because that's
a different deal.
Okay, well, you guys are convincing me on the solitude. But maybe
I
we-
find something better than solitude, retain opportunities for, limited.
We can define it later.
Crowdless areas or.
Crowdless, yeah.
Something like that.
Self-reflection.
Maybe you could be on a trail and see 100 people, it might be quiet, but
Yeah,
yeah, you see
Yeah.
people crowded, there's a lot of different ways to,
right.
Mhm.
yeah, describe what people are trying to attain when they're out there.
Okay, I will work on, yeah, another way. Solitude is a loaded term, and so is quiet use, so we can't use either one of those, but.
It's like, how do you maintain a quality experience knowing that more and more people are coming and more rivers are pushing it? So how do you maintain the quality of the experience?
Everyone in this room, knows busy by Dolores Ranger District standards, not by White River standards. Sure. So it's a different world. We have a different world.
That's a very good point, yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, good. I mean, I don't know that, I think that the tension is still there between those things, like, I don't, like, this is why you need a group of people to deal with these issues, because they don't.
And I think it's important, and maybe once we start coming up with action items, it'll be clear, what that strategy should say.
Honestly, I struggle a little bit with goal number one, the language degrading locals' outdoor experiences. Degrading means so many things to so many people. And it has a negative connotation to me. So if there's a way to make that a little more positive by, saying just maintaining high quality recreation experiences.
Could you just be real general and just say, negative impact or, why don't you just keep it real? So we don't box ourselves in a corner. So.
I kind of like what you just said though, James, spinning it positive, maintaining a high quality experience.
Yep.
I think it sort of sets the stage for every strategy kind of.
Sure. And it allows us to define that, however we define that as we go. I like it.
Are we focusing in on locals still, or are we just gonna leave it?
I think we should focus it on locals because if it's nice for the locals, it's gonna be nice for the visitors.
It does, that gives it that flavor of like what we've heard, so much this anxiety that it's not gonna be any fun anymore around here. It's too busy. Okay, cool. This develop new trails to accommodate growing regional population, that's, not everybody agrees with that. But it's like what, I put it in there because I've heard it.
We will continue to have people knocking at the door for more trail opportunities.
We're not in the mode of shutting that down necessarily. Well, we have this whole goal, 1.2 as well, so, okay, let me just review here back into the comments. This is clunky, I'm sorry, but this is just gonna have to be the way it is. We're grouped right here.
Give us time to get back to 1.1.2 with the ideas. So I think everybody's in agreement of what they're looking for. It's just that language.
Locals only trails, right?
You have to scan a QR code and like allow you.
Scan a retina.
Oh, scan a retina. I like this idea, guys.
Okay, I think we should probably move into goal 2 here. God, I always get lost in Google. It's just like the thing.
Can you just highlight or take a note for yourself? Can we spin avoid degradation into something positive, like Gabby was saying? I don't know what it would be, but
If we did.
We did, maintaining high quality experience.
In 1.1.3.
sorry, 1.1.3, avoid degradation.
Oh, sorry.
Continue to make, I don't know, maintain.
Yeah, it can be similar to.
Maintain the quality of dispersed camping,
Experience. Yeah,
something like that.
something like that, thanks. I like the idea of positivity, what we're gonna do instead of hope doesn't happen.
When we were talking about degradation there, was it like Oh, this is people to people, not people to landscape. Okay, so high quality is a people to people thing. We're not talking about ruts.
No, I'm not talking about roads in this section, but there'll be a section.
This is really about the bar getting continually lower for dispersed camping until you're just in a gravel parking lot with a bunch of other RVs. Which some people freaking love that. You see them drive all the way from Texas to do that, but.
And we can put them there.
They can use that part and then buy things here
And go away.
and then, yeah.
Okay, so I have a lot of questions about 1.2, and there are some comments about it. Let's see here, the constant lost in little docs here. Okay, so Rika says gap here may be identifying areas where better access is needed. So 1.2, that's in reference to the goal itself. I believe.
That probably would just be a unique strategy, just identifying areas, I mean, from our perspective of like river access. That could be a different, under the strategy, not a specific goal.
So that is a strategy to manage impacts on the resource, yes?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not reading my notes, but, I think so, yes.
Yeah, isn't everything in 1.2 a strategy or? All the supporting bullets.
Is that where that belongs? I mean, it is because if you don't have consolidated access, people damage it, is that the?
They make their own social trails, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. But this is with respect to, should we leave it with respect to river access or should we generalize it?
I think it's a broad statement that we should keep there because we try and move, operations out of drainage for hydro reasons. We're trying to avoid Russian archaeological site for obvious reasons, so. It's not just river access, it's access to the forest, access to being.
And river access is a subset of that.
Yep, yeah.
That being action.
I don't know. It's not in here. I mean, we don't have anything like it.
I think it captures it. 1.2.2 is, those are some of the things we react to as land managers. And best to be able to science may simply be just the information we have, right? Controlling the forest, for instance, and finding the problems we have out there.
Okay, I'm getting confused. So the thing that I was asking about is whether, I guess what I'm wondering is whether improving new access is actually a strategy to manage, to accomplish goal 1.2. Do we need a new strategy? That's what I thought maybe where we were headed. I don't know, actually. I'm asking the group that. Like this, it could be a tactic for minimizing or reducing impacts.
If you talking 1.2.3, focus on there. I'm sorry.
I am focused on the comment from Rika that says a gap here may be identifying areas where better access is needed, parentheses, thinking river access.
And maybe a better place for that to live is 1.3. I just think in general, that's a gap.
Yeah.
But potentially 1.3 is a better place for that.
Under the multiple use management.
Yeah, correct.
And do we generalize it?
Yeah, I think to Tom's point, that makes sense.
Okay, I'm just gonna like flip at it as a strategy. Okay, cool. Other comments on this section included a goal specific, oops, we lost her. variance here, sorry. There we go, we're back to this. Specifically, what I have a similar question. So the comment from Alex is the goal specifically we need a goal that specifically references wildlife and conservation. And then Rika makes a suggestion, identify conservation priorities based on wildlife, habitat, biodiversity, and other uses. That's interesting. So that's kind of like a little bit like the new trails thing, but it's like identifying areas that you actually promote specifically for conservation. So that's an idea that we don't have here. And I'm sort of like going through and sort of setting the question here a little bit, but one of the things I was wondering about in this, and it's kind of along these same lines of adding more specificity to it, was maybe we need something about how we use the mapping. Like, what the heck does it do? Because I mean, we saw the map. It could be really powerful. We talked a little bit about what does Montelores Coalition Roundtable do in the future. And I started wondering the same thing about these tools. So if we put, like, when you were showing the map and you're like, we need this thing in a plan, I'm like, hey, we're writing a plan. Cool, we could put the map, at least this draft, in the plan. I don't see, you know, unless somebody tells me not to do that, I think that's something we could do. But then going forward, the map is a digital tool. You can zoom in and zoom out and use it at different scales and think about it in all sorts of different ways. Do we want to talk about how we're using it? And I think that's kind of what there was, like, some of the concerns about the strategies with this goal, I think, had to do with us leaving it at, we'll figure it out in the future. Like, let's get the information in place. We need information about the impacts on how natural resources and what the impacts of recreation could be on those resources, like the map that we were seeing. And then we need sort of better data on recreation use so that we know, is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Where is it increasing? Where is it decreasing? And so we have this kind of data frame, but we're not really saying, like, so what? I think that's kind of what, that's the gist of some of the comments I've heard.
Show us 1.33 and 1.34. So 1.34 discusses a NEPA process, which would be an opportunity to take some of this mapping information, some of which is already Forest Service or BLM or Park Service information, and we would roll that into, that would be some of our best available science, which would be part of the NEPA review. So my sense is that we have an opportunity to use this mapping tool along with the other data sets that different agencies have to help us make, helps us support multiple use out there. So I think that mapping certainly could use some additional input, such as trail use data, road use data, but it's a tool that we would use, the data we would use when we go through a NEPA review.
Yeah, I think at some point we'll need some type of process on how we're gonna use this within our group, not just through the NEPA process. And NEPA process is sometimes it's kind of restricted and it's very, very defined. My hope is that we can maybe augment the NEPA process with using different tools like this. And I've been thinking about this a lot because my background's in natural resources. And even though natural resource and conservation is kind of a small part of this, I see using this tool and other tools as more of an action item under 1.22 up there. So I've been kind of silent because I think at some point when we come up with action items, it'll go under 1.22 and then 1.23 can kind of be included into that process. I've been hesitant about adding another strategy by saying, develop a process, to use the best available science. I mean, we could reword that, but, yeah, I mean, what does everyone else think about, where do we need a process put into this strategy on how to use this and other tools? Because like James said, this is a 10,000 foot view. There's a lot of other information that we're going to need to drill down, because this is really a general view of concerns on just 35 wildlife. There's a lot of other species out there we're going to have to address, which kind of goes into just a public education about, how do we use this, along with all the other tools that we have. So, yeah, I think we need a process, but I don't need to use this. But at this point, I don't think we need to create another strategy.
I don't know, man. I mean, I had the same question. I really did. I was like, how in the heck are we gonna, because this is new, right? This plan, like if it was a county comprehensive plan, we'd know exactly what it was and how you use it, just because of what it's called. Whereas this is like a new kind of thing. And that's kind of why I think what you're saying is actually something that might need to get written down. Because the way that, and I almost want to say like the different users of it need to develop their own take on it. Like BLM would have one take on it, and Forest Service might have another way that this kind of thing plugs in. NEPA is obviously one place where it plugs in pretty clean, but there could be there's other, I guess scoping is like always part of NEPA, isn't it? I mean, everything you do public input wise from federal lands is always NEPA.
Your funds are on the level of NEPA.
There's no non-NEPA public input that you're ever doing.
Categorical exclusions. What's about categorical exclusions?
That's
and I don't think, for the projects that would come out of this coalition, cat access with categorical exclusions would probably not be, those are associated with maybe smaller projects.
So is that strategy under the?
I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that, or I don't want to paint the impression that this strategy, for instance, something in mapping is going to be one of the only tools we use in a NEPA review. It's a good tool to use, but there's a lot of other things that we're going to be looking at and using other data, other information, in addition to some of this mapping that we work pretty closely with CPW on to drive our decision making.
Yeah, I guess to give an example of where we've used this type of mapping in the past is, historically, it's been common for like a trails proposal organization, trails group, to go through a several year planning process of planning out, a system of trails or something like that, without on the front end kind of coming to CPW or natural resource organizations to be in the planning process from the front. And so they go through like this years long planning process, then they go to the federal agencies with it, and then the federal agencies come to CPW for our comments, and we say, no, this isn't going to work for us, and here's why. And then the trails group is frustrated because they've gone through this years long planning process without having any of the information on the front end about like why this might be a sensitive area or why it might not be. And I think that if CPW or natural resource agencies are more involved in the planning process on the front end of things, then maybe we can help plan and guide some of that into areas where it might be more appropriate, so that you don't go through this years long planning process just to get told no. I think if we can come in on the front end with some of these types of tools and be like, okay, if this is where your proposal is, it's gonna get turned down, it's gonna be a no. But if you come to us on the front end and we kind of work through some of this stuff, then we can figure out something that's gonna work.
Jacksonville, right? Yeah, exactly, like Jacksonville. Yeah. So, the Pagosa district had an issue where they went far down the planning process without doing what Jamie just explained. But the fortunate situation we're in here is that we have these strong local partnerships with our trail programs. We talked early on with them on things, and they've, I'm sure Jim Ostrom out of Rico will grow with all of us about being involved in a process as they develop a trail for the town. And so I pride ourselves on the fact that we have such good relationships with our trail partners here that we're talking with them early in the process. Still doesn't mean we don't hit speed bumps with, with our differences in interpretation of what one group wants versus what the feds may want, but
to your point, just trying to avoid a Jackson Mountain situation where you go through a years-long planning process, only to get told no at the very end when, like, involving some other folks who started that and some other tools that started that.
Same with Dolores Rico Travel Management Plan 15 years ago.
right,
It wasn't enough, really public input before they get so far down the road with planning. And you have protests.
right.
Do
I-
we have? do we
I just
have
wanted
that-
to say something. Sorry, it's hard to hear if there's a lag or not. So if I interrupted somebody, I apologize. So like I feel like this is like really good talking about goal 1.3 in the NEPA process. What happened? I was pretty intimate with Jackson Mountain's like involvement on the NEPA, but there's also this issue of, and just like going back to goal 1.2, where we were talking about maybe including another strategy. Goal 1.2 is basically we have this stewardship education component, and then everything else is more like we're collecting data. Nothing's actually active on that conservation front. So we have this goal about managing near and long-term impacts that kind of dives into some of the gathering of data, but doesn't have any sort of like, aside from the stewardship education, any mechanics to it as like an action type item for like active conservation, any goals that outline things that I feel like value as a community when it comes to wildlife, which if we're going to go 1.3 and then we're going to lean on to NEPA for all of that, what we're saying is we want to do what we want to do until it conflicts with the science. We're not embodying that conservation element, part of the namesake of this plan, as more of I feel like a modus operandi or like a core value within the group. And so then we also have to look and ask, like, what if NEPA disappears, right? What if 2 or 3 years from now, the NEPA process is fundamentally different and the language we have around protecting wildlife in this multi-use conversation is with the backbone of a NEPA process that we don't have anymore. And we didn't really talk about wildlife. Wildlife, by the way, isn't mentioned in these goals specifically at all. We use natural resources and heritage resources without really getting specific about some of the more vulnerable items, which are wildlife, which we have that map for. So I just wanted to kind of get that off my chest. That's sort of how it feels, I guess, at this point, is that, and like also kind of looking back on Scorp stuff and some of the surveys about what people want, what those underprivileged folks are looking for, what sorts of recreation opportunities people want from a survey standpoint, from a populist standpoint, outside of maybe just the representatives on the roundtable too. But I know I'm kind of like throwing a lot of thoughts out there and I'm just really kind of rambling, but my take home message, I guess, the point I'm trying to get across is I'd rather not just lean on NEPA because like I wouldn't have, like, I don't need to be involved with this if it's just going to come down to to a NEPA conversation at the end of a plan. I was hoping we could sort of capture some of that conservation and stewardship mindset as more of like a goal, or like can't find the word, but part of what the organization stands for, along with the trails.
Almost like a desired outcome is what you're referring to. So, can we?
Regarding principles.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, would we go back to 1.2.1, explore and implement stewardship education, with a, with an eye towards, conservation, something that's.
I think that's a good idea.
Something, a broad statement there. Alex, did you hear that? Can we add something to 1.2.1 to capture what you're looking for?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's good. It's hard to capture, so I appreciate everyone trying to be reasonable as I'm sort of not communicating very well, and I realize that. But
Yeah.
No, you've got a great point, and I think for myself, I'll speak for myself, but several of us looking around this table are not necessarily in the conservation field, so I forget that that's a really important planning portion. I think about it on my personal level, but not as a fundamental. So it's an important reminder. So yes, thank you. I agree with it.
I think the other point that I think really is critical, at least from a conservation perspective, is what does this group bring
Mhm.
that isn't usable, that isn't
That's a
already
good point.
captured in?
Yeah,
NEPA?
that's fair.
Right. Because Dallas's point, why are people investing their time in this group that NEPA is gonna capture all of it? So I think that's a fair question.
Would the mapping process and the product be kind of a graphical representation of that guiding principle? Because it's showing these different, well, at least some of the different values that we're concerned about. And it may be a tool, for example, for the roundtable as they're discussing possible opportunities to say, well, here's all these different things that we know we need to consider. And of course, again, it doesn't replace NEPA, but it reflects the different resources that we're tracking. I don't know.
I guess I just see this group sometimes, especially as a roundtable member, as sort of a bridge between NEPA and the we're the lay people. I mean, we're the people, it's like you said early on, Kara, the people that come, and a trails group or a group that says, hey, we got this idea, what do you think? And then this group can be a bridge between that and, I'm gonna point at you guys because you're NEPA, and, right? And be able to sort of bring that down to the average person, like, here's the things that you're gonna have to deal with. So in that sense, we can also be a clearinghouse, I think, or a warehouse of information. Hey, you're gonna bump up against the NEPA process on this. You're gonna bump up against this wildlife map, these types of things. So it's being this connector between those two. Yeah.
I see that falling into the education.
Yeah, totally.
Stewardship, and it's pretty broad, which can include that, not only education for, the roundtable, the executive community, but also the public.
I'm gonna say communities,
Yes.
because this is Montezuma County, there's a bunch of us, bunch of communities here.
And obviously, part of the NEPA process is community engagement, and the whole scoping process and all that as well. So maybe this is a part of that process.
Okay. That's like that purpose statement I was looking for. That was good.
Well done, hashed out.
Yeah, there you go. I've been looking at that. So that is actually. Is that right? The bridge? I mean, I kind of like that.
As a bridge or a conduit, I mean, yeah. Same idea.
Yeah, conduit is, if bridge implies that there's a gap.
Right.
I don't know, I'll work on that.
An interpreter of NEPA.
Yeah, right. Great NEPA interpreters. They don't have that at the Burger King in Cayenta, NEPA interpreters.
But they have almost everything else. They've got an Navajo code doctor.
They got the Navajo code talkers, but they don't have the NEPA interpreters. Okay, so that's good. Well, I have one other thought with this is do we want to just write wildlife in here? Like we have, I mean, we're just saying natural resources, right? So that includes wildlife, but I don't know. I mean, it's a little bit of a categorical, you know, it gives me a little bit of a categorical red flag, but actually I can get over it. pretty
I think
quick.
I think that we're like, so recreation includes a lot of things, and we're calling out trails specifically, and natural resources includes a lot of things, and you know, mining, logging, grazing, agriculture, water, wildlife. So I think, you know, it would be nice to call out wildlife specifically because of their vulnerabilities and their importance in their relationship with SCORP. Things like wildlife viewing, they are an integral part of recreation at the end of the day.
So can we just add it to the list? Is that acceptable to say natural resources?
I was gonna
Wildlife.
suggest that maybe there's essentially a definitions section, and we explain what we are, when we say this,
Right, this is
what we're speaking to.
Exactly.
And that keeps this cleaner, but gives something for people to reference.
So-
Because how I might think of outdoor rec, I might think of four-wheelers and things like that. You might think of following your cows on a horse, like, I mean, so I think there's an opportunity to spell that out.
Nikki, that's huge, especially because our definition is gonna be different than other RTIs.
Than Chaffee
And-
counties
exactly,
and
thank
things
you.
like that.
And that solves the solitude problem.
Yes.
Solitude
Yeah.
means many different things.
In this plan, you want definitions in this plan?
A little glossary of terms at the back.
Yeah, like a glossary of terms kind of things, not like.
Just at the, yeah, at the back, you know, here are some words that may have gotten a reaction, this is what we mean when we say X, Y, or Z.
Rather than bulking all of this up,
Keep it in the
that
front.
information is located elsewhere.
Okay. Yeah, I'm kind
And
of,
that's just.
I'm obviously, you know, wildlife biologist here, but I think it would be helpful to have something that mentions, like, managing for stable wildlife populations specifically, somewhere in the document. But that's like a goal of ours, is to manage for stable wildlife. Or wildlife conservation efforts or something.
Is that a strategy under 1.2, or is that a different deal?
Or is that an action?
Or is it a goal?
No, it's
I
And
can see
one
it as a
thing that I
goal,
would say,
a number of
we-
different strategies.
You know, we had a
right?
conversation yesterday about maybe taking the action item matrix and separating it out as maybe as an appendix versus it, so that we have this overarching, larger guiding principle document that we can use in generic situations. And so it's more important, I think, to embed it in the major document and not keep it segregated to the action items.
I feel like it's a strategy, because if we're gonna maintain the near and long-term impact to natural resources, one of those strategies is maintaining and managing for wildlife.
Right. and if
What
we-
was it again, the stable,
Yeah.
say the words you just.
Something like manage for stable or increasing wildlife populations, or something about wildlife conservation specifically.
Does anybody, I mean, this is a kind of a heavy strategy, are we okay with this?
I guess my only question is, this group is not the one doing the managing.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking
Way
about
we
too,
sort of
who's the
support-
manager here, yeah?
Yeah,
Well, we can,
support.
that we can,
Support.
Well, you know, we've set these, other goals of, you know, the solitude discussion we had earlier, trying to manage, kind of keep that feel of why we all live here. And I don't see an issue with the statement as well, because we're managing for multiple positive outcomes, which includes, the visitor experience that your folks may have at High Camp, what someone may have at Phil's World or at the park, but also ensuring that we're managing for the stable wildlife. So I think that's a good, I think it's a good statement.
And that's a good spot for it, Tom.
I agree. Okay.
Yeah.
You could put it in 1.22, just behind natural resource or natural, you just put i.e. stable wildlife populations, sensitive species, what other values we think are important and are natural. The same with heritage, you can include cultural, ag resources. Or we could make a definition.
Yeah, I think this is one where the other plans, I noticed this, that they call out wildlife specifically, and I think it's because they hit. I'm just guessing they've hit the same place where we are.
And they're
Like
remembering.
they,
their
all of it
CBW
hit this,
funding.
they're like, wait, we have to call out wildlife, you know?
But seriously, I mean, I think that's very important for us.
So we just have to have the words in there so that it's in your face, I guess. I don't think it affects the implementation of this thing, because really, you're right, I mean, these are action items, like when we get into it, about how you these things, like.
But as users groups, we also have a role to managing. Maybe we don't directly do it like CPW does, but we educate our people about population control, when not to go on that trail. So we play a part, maybe not as much as we roll.
Yeah, and again, as a layperson, I need to be able to know as a group what my value is, what our value is, and what our messaging. So when I'm at club and I'm talking to the hunter from so-and-so, and they say, why can't I access this point? Because we have a value in this community to maintain a stable wildlife population. That's why we value.
I
and we
think it's
appreciate-
it's also really important to, and part of that education component is maybe even just amongst ourselves, but recreation has this sort of view of not being a consumptive use in a landscape. But if you do look at the peer review research on it, recreation displaces wildlife. If you look at places with heavy recreational use that used to have a lot of wildlife, some of these towns along the I-70 corridor in Colorado, for example, we might not be able to actually draw causation, but there are studies being done that can accomplish that, that have accomplished that. And we know that, recreation causes there to be less wildlife on the landscape from a scientific perspective. So that is sort of the basis for this being a part of the conversation. And maybe that's part of the disconnect too, is like, oh, it's just hunters, that are consuming the wildlife. But actually, I'm here because as a hunter, I'm hoping to conserve the wildlife, and I've seen what happens to their populations when we don't approach recreation very mindfully of that fact.
Yeah, Alex, I think you maybe misunderstood me. I don't mean just hunters. I agree. I think mountain bikers, hikers, whoever I'm having that conversation with, I'm saying that this group values a stable wildlife population. So whatever user group I'm having a conversation with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And sorry if I misinterpreted. I'm like, it's a really crazy time of year for work for me, which is not actually conservation, unfortunately. But so I'm kind of multitasking, and if I did misinterpret that, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Okay.
Two of the major tools that are in development is the wildlife habitat and corridor mapping, as well as the upcoming like cell data, right? Those are meant to mesh in order to say, where is the recreation impacting the wildlife? How can we do better, right? Like that's kind of one of the places this is going, right? So I think it's right to have it included up front myself.
Okay, cool. We're gonna get, let's see what we got. I'm going back to the Google Docs here to see if there's anything else. Google Docs. There you go. Thank you, Wayne.
One other thought too, like we went on and talked about the improved access, but it might also be worth mentioning like equitable access in this document somewhere. I haven't seen that coming through, but maybe I missed it because, but just making sure that like somewhere in there, we're thinking about all users, all abilities.
I'm not sure if it's captured in the ADA portion of this strategy.
Yeah, I think there's a section.
There's a whole section.
Yeah.
Great, sorry.
Yes,
No, it's good.
well, I mean,
Good.
ADA doesn't mean equitable for everybody, that's just one population, so if we're thinking
Yeah.
about equitability.
Yeah, I don't know if there was additional,
I think there is, Tom, there's a lot of additional.
we could review that, make sure that's, so. Beyond just ADA.
Okay, so, I had a couple observations. I kind of was glancing through the notes. A lot of the stuff we actually addressed in our conversation. It wandered around enough that we hit a bunch of it, but, I wanted to move down to goal 3.1. We can back up to 2 as well, but I wanted to move down here just to cover something that is gonna be tough for me to do on my own. This has to do with, so we're talking about, this is where we get into funding, right? So this is the develop a conservation projects plan, because that's what the state, everything that we can see, the state's gonna wanna see projects, discrete projects, that's what they like to fund. All of us that have done state funding know that's how it works.
That's
It's temporary, have an idea, they have a program, they match, perfect.
a major deliverable goal for this group.
So, let's see, so what I'm wondering is, we have this 3.1.4 strategy that says, seek formal support for the outdoor recreation conservation plan from local government leadership and other strategic partners. I'm wondering whether, I guess my big thing I'm wondering is like, what thoughts do people have about the rollout of this plan? I don't know that we get a strategy out of this. I just think it's, maybe we can inform it. Maybe it's too hard to figure out right now. But getting to strategy 3.1.4, maybe these are action steps of getting support for that, but maybe there's a bigger rollout. Like, we were talking about how this plan is a bridge between the community and the, and the federal land planners, and those processes. So there's a lot of territory there to make. And so how do we, I mean, one of the experiences I've had with strategic planning is, like, you can strategic plan and have this perfect plan. And if nobody knows about it, it doesn't do anything. If nobody supports it, it doesn't go anywhere. It can be awesome. It can be so well thought through. But if it's not pushed out there, and that, I mean, it goes, I think you all have been talking about this too, so like, it's all hands on deck.
So Gabe, you're talking about something as simple as just saying, promote awareness of and seek formal support for it, or are you talking about a whole other category or line item?
I'm just wondering, like, if there's anything specific on how we go about that, because we're getting close to that. And there's like, who do we send it to? Like, once I get this thing in draft, it's gonna be in draft, and we can get comments on it and that sort of thing, and like send it out, boom, here's the new plan, or is there another, like?
Oh, no, we need to send it out for buy-in and some feedback.
We would have.
Is that it though? Is that it? Is it like send it out for feedback, or is it like something more deliberate?
Like what?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking
What
the
would be,
question.
I'm not trying to challenge you, I'm trying to understand, like, when I imagine that process, and we talked about this yesterday, I imagine getting it to a draft that is something that people can wrap their heads around, and then and sharing it with the public, sharing it with, like, sitting down with the county commissioners, getting input, like, people can throw darts at it now, because it's a thing that we thought about, here it is, what do you think of where we're going? And then take that comment back, we reconsider based on what we hear, and then we come out with a final. And the hope is, as I understand it, and again, acknowledging I'm very new to this process, and so I could not be in the same direction as other people are going, is that by doing that piece, that's where we get that buy-in that's going to make this useful, hopefully, for local governments. And Gabe, as you mentioned yesterday, we may never get to the point where we get formal adoption of these plans, but that they become useful and acceptable and guiding. I don't know how we make that happen without having a draft that we take and we ask for comment, and then we come back, weave it in, and then have a final that we present.
I'm glad you said that, because I guess I'm part of what I didn't articulate well is, what's the point of the rollout? Like, what are we trying to accomplish?
Community
Like,
buy-in.
is it really crucial to get local government buy-in? Because that's gonna take to use a technical term, that's gonna take a crap ton of effort.
Yeah.
It'll take a lot of effort to get that, and you may not get it. You may go for it and not get it, and then wonder what that means. I'm trying to figure out whether if the way this thing is evolved, I really do agree that it's like a bridge between community interests like trails groups and the agencies that manage the resources. You know, and those are, if it's a municipality that owns resources, you got city council, you can go deal with it that way. If it's federal lands, you got NEPA, that's all you got. You know, if it's out for public comment or there's a meeting, you can go do that, but there isn't, you know, so we've had good turnout and interest in everything that we've done because originally Montezuma County was paying for it and now Montelores. So everywhere that we've gone, we've had like pretty good turnout and interest in this thing. It just raises the question overall, like, is that piece of it, of trying to get like this 3.1.4 formal support, like that's like a letter or something. That's what we mean. Like, yes, we support this. Everybody, either a roll call or a head nod or no objections. I don't know. Everybody kind of does that differently, but I'm wondering whether that's something that we need to shoot for and whether that's like on the to-do list, because it has implications on how this thing comes together and happens with it, I think, personally.
Well, I would just say two things. One thing goes to what, I don't have an answer on how you want to do that, whether you want to roll it out to the public or you just want to take it out there and say, this is what we did. But I do say this, I thought that's what we lay people were here for, the round table members. We were representative of the public.
Of the community.
Of the community, right? Of the public, yes.
Right.
And so if you go to, let's say you come to my town and I'm still sitting in an elected official's point and say, we want your support, I would want to know that it just wasn't the agencies sitting there coming up with this plan. I would want to know that there was a roundtable of public members who put in input to get there. So however it goes about that, I think that's going to be a selling point as opposed to say that we sat here with the Division of Wildlife and the Forest Service, and they just came up with this plan, and they're bringing them, they want our funds. That's gonna be a tougher set.
Yeah, I don't think we get formal support before we roll it out and ask for some feedback on it, you know. Good.
Oh, no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, if it comes into our boardroom, one of the first questions we're gonna ask is, where's our community at around with it? And if we don't have the buy-in there, and I think another thing would be even feasible for us to focus there. So public buy-in with it where we're at, and then would it be feasible for us? Cause there may be buy-in, but feasible for the.
From an economic standpoint here?
Yeah, I mean, we're in an ever-shrinking financial box.
We bring more people in. I get more calls from the sheriff.
Yes,
I get,
I mean, resource allocation.
yes,
Diminished.
yeah, I get Rico rolling out to do search and rescue.
Yeah.
So what we do has a ripple effect to the services that local communities, local government provide, so.
I mean, first for us would be public buy-in. If there's public buy-in, we can pursue it.
But I mean, it's implied in what you're saying is get on the agenda, come and talk to us about it. basically.
Absolutely, yeah, you can come in, we can absolutely have a discussion.
Get it in the, get it in
That's
the
if I
packet.
can sooner the better too. Cause that allows us.
I agree. I'm thinking the same thing about Mancos. I mean, I would imagine that at some point, we're gonna be seeking formal support in maybe a grant application. You know, and just having that basic understanding from the decision makers, in each community and the county level, gonna be super important to get that moving forward.
Okay, and note that this isn't all rolling out on Park Service or Forest Service or BLM land. You know, Jason may have a trail project along the river. Dolores may have additional projects, paths to Mesa Verde, you know, so we want to make sure that this strategy supports those non-federal projects.
And do we plan on coming up with some action items under these strategies? Seems like that might take another 6 months or a year to come up with, but it seems like that's important because these strategies right now are just kind of nebulous. But even if we come up with a handful of projects, just so there is something for people to throw darts at, just to give people an idea of what the coalition is thinking about.
It's funny that you say that, because we went back and forth on that, talking about this specifically yesterday, of, do we want to broach county commissioners with, here's what we're gonna do, and does that box you in, and then suddenly you feel like you've got a responsibility or a liability there, where you don't wanna necessarily take a stance either way. Or do we wanna, that's kind of where the discussion of separating out the action item list from the overall overarching plan came from, trying to be a little bit more sensitive and softer touching when we're bringing it to local government in particular.
Could just come up with some potential projects that we're thinking about. Hypothetical projects.
Options are never bad.
I think in a lot of ways, that's where rubber hits the road for local governments. 'Cause, you know, Montezuma County manages no recreation other than the fairgrounds. We have no other property. And even the pass to Mesa Verde, if that ever comes to fruition, that's 100% within CDOT right of way. So in a lot of ways, CDOT's really kind of managing all that. So, but projects are something that we can support. And so I think that having this buy-in from the commissioners is pretty important. I think just having this conversation with the commissioners and getting in front of them, for the sake of transparency, if nothing else, is really important. And I think the other thing is, kind of read through the comprehensive, land use plan. And, most everything we talked about was already in that plan. So, we've probably got a lot that we can, kind of draft off of anyway.
I think commissioners and your municipalities, you gotta get them as well.
Yeah.
It's maybe more important for municipalities, because you guys have park systems.
They actually have stuff.
Things like that.
The plan is connective tissue with the whole area. I mean, that's why it's called Montelores. So those entities, your municipalities and your county leadership.
Strategic
buy-in.
Strategic partners, I believe also includes our trail partners, because we want to make sure they understand that we're not taking their important role with us.
So we actually don't have to revise the strategy, we just gotta fill it out, and the action planning templates. So the action plan, it's a matrix and you can, I don't think we're gonna finish it. I mean, I think we're gonna have blanks in it, I'll put it that way. Like, we may not get every single strategy action item down. There might be some unknowns, or we gotta wait. But that's the kind of thing that you could reconvene the roundtable and update that. That's what you're supposed to do with action planning, is like meet once a year or something like that, go through it, cross out the things you did, and then think about what's next, because every time you try and do something, you learn about a bunch of things you didn't know. So I think that's good. I'm gonna leave like a little bit of time for just, last questions and open-ended stuff, but I wanted to, cover this, 3.2 a little bit because I'm just kind of wondering whether this is hard hitting enough, given what's happened in the past couple months with the federal funding and workforce. The way that this thing is set up right now, there's one strategy about developing a revenue source for seed money. So, and then there's the thinking about the donations that might actually become an action step under 3.2.1, but, and then the rest of it really is like looking for grant funding. And a lot of the funding, not all the funding is federal, but a lot of it is. A lot of it that comes through the state is federal.
Yeah, it starts federal.
So we're just like, anyways, so we got like less regular operations funding, we got less grant funding. I just wanted to bring this back up and see whether, based on what's happened, and if anybody's been kind of reflecting on this and whether we're still hitting this correctly, or we need to put more weight on local initiatives. I mean, and then it related to this is on the workforce issue, like when the coal mines close, state of Colorado has a whole program. They've got a whole program on retraining and everything. And they're starting to do that with like oil and gas as well. So when natural resources close down, you have a workforce that has got skills and now also they have a job. So I was like, geez, man, maybe that's part of it now. That there's actually like federal workers that are gonna need a new career. And how does that fit in this whole new picture where the funding is in question, and maybe we need to be thinking about developing local and state funding sources to manage federal lands and to pay people to do that. So anyways, a lot has happened. I just wanted to step back and just see whether anybody had any additional thoughts on this.
Seems like it's too early to know what the
Yeah.
short-term, long-term effect is.
But we did have a discussion last week about how this organization could be the fiscal agent for some funds that would come in from a variety of sources.
But it's not a bad strategy or goal.
Yeah.
To not be dependent on federal grant money or whatever. And that may be just, we may not know what that is, just developing strategies to be more fiscally sustainable. And that may be, private grants or how do we develop those types?
Maybe, Chad, we could even just say other or alternate with that related funding from there, because things are in flux and until it settles.
Yeah.
We're gonna be wrong no matter what we choose.
Okay, good. Oh. This is a funny question, and it's kind of a loose end, but I was wondering whether we really are addressing the strategic significance of toilets adequately. They have everything to do with everything. And right now, we've got it with the ADA piece. That's pretty much where we have it. And I keep wanting to put it all over the place, but that was just a random thought, but, and given how expensive they are. Like,
Yeah, they're really expensive.
they're like, it's a 6-figure under enterprise.
And internally, we know the return on that investment, but our public and our audience probably don't. Probably need a bathroom, so.
Feels like an action item.
Yeah. Okay, so are there any, I'm gonna show you the action planning matrix here, but I wanna just open it up to any other comments that anybody had, anything, any other gaps? I was queuing up most of this stuff, so. The remaining.
I feel like this is Tori online. I feel like this was maybe discussed a little bit when talking about wildlife and kind of the natural resources, but as I was doing kind of like a high level review, noticed that like when looking kind of at the topic level, there wasn't anything like mentioning conservation. I know in goal 3.1, you talk about the conservation plan. And just, I guess I was a little surprised just with the importance of natural and heritage resource conservation to the counties that it didn't have like its own topic associated with it.
Is that part of our theme of like stating things in the positive? A little bit here, I mean, this is outdoor recreation use and impacts. Is where we have that content. I added generalizes impacts because you've got like conservation impacts and you know, impacts of us on each other. The overall title is, you're right, outdoor recreation conservation strategic plan. No,
Tori, are you saying, cultural heritage in particular?
I
Or-
guess both natural and cultural heritage conservation. Because yeah, I guess when thinking about that conservation and rec plan in kind of goal 3, um, there's a topic for outdoor recreation, but I just didn't see a topic for conservation. It kind of is like a little bit threaded in, kind of through the lens of outdoor recreation, how it impacts conservation goals. But yeah, just didn't see it as a topic. And maybe that was intentional and the way that like the partnership wants to look at conservation through the lens of recreation, but was just pointing that out as something I noticed that, there's a plan for recreation and conservation plan, but they both don't have like a topic within this like strategy.
it is all like all the conservation content that we have in here is oriented toward recreation. Pretty much. Trying to figure out, like, I mean, I wanna say that that's just how it evolved.
I think it's built in, it's part of the infrastructure, it's foundational to everything that we do. There are chances for us perhaps to highlight that down the road as we get more feedback, but it's an integral part of what we're doing. To call it out specifically, we're gonna add a lot more to all of these different categories, and it's just gonna be repeating what's already in our head or already in our.
I'm sorry, what was the goal from the state, I mean, for this? Right?
Yeah,
Isn't it?
especially since Tori's speaking from the state level.
Yeah, yeah.
Was it
How
like-
do you view that, Tori? How does that kind of match up to other partnerships, or do you feel like that's a gap that we should address?
Yeah, I mean, kind of with the regional partnership initiative, kind of that goal is to find kind of whatever that balance of recreation and conservation, across the state and how that looks regionally. And so excited to see that, the plan in goal 3 is for both outdoor recreation and conservation. And I know kind of when I reviewed, this document, and I know Jody, took a look at it as well. Her comment being that, she didn't see kind of conservation maybe on that same level as recreation. But with that plan and goal 3, it could become more clear, I think, what that looks like for the Montelores Coalition. And would just, yeah, encourage that when thinking of, priority projects, making sure that conservation and wildlife and recreation are all part of those projects that are elevated or even applied for future implementation funding that will be available through the Regional Partnership Initiative, which won't be through federal sources. So that funding is secure.
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, these are just raw goals and strategies, and there is no narrative yet. But I think with the narrative, we can really help with the conservation piece with the narrative and describe like how what part, like, we're taking kind of a narrow path at conservation here. It's not the whole thing. It's relating outdoor recreation and conservation. It's balancing those two. So I think we can express that. Other, that was a good input. Any other things that we should have thought of? Things that have annoyed you? Okay. All right, I'm gonna show you something. This here, we won't have to work, I promise. We're just gonna look at it. Yeah, well, you do have to come. I want you to give me a little bit of input on this. So this is like an action plan template, pretty basic deal. Nothing fancy. The goal would be like listed up here. The strategy here. The steps. Go to the, would be the plan rollout one. Send the draft to each jurisdiction, get on an agenda and go talk to them. I mean, that's the kind of level that we're talking about. And then we'd say, okay, well, this is the director, monologue director. Some things are going to be project oriented, so you list the partners. Obviously, this thing is going to have to be landscape format here. We won't have enough room, but funding sources. Sometimes partners funding sources are different. So we'll list funding sources and then time frame. Not the deadline, the time frame. Are there any other columns you think? Because what I'm gonna do is I'm basically gonna print this thing out. And it'll be hard to redo it once I print it out and bring it in, because at the April, what is that meeting date? I forget. I don't have my sleep, but April 15th, I want to say, for the tax day.
Have to check.
Yeah, it's like April 15th.
Okay.
Tax day, sweet, we'll all be in great moods. So at that meeting, we'll bring in action planning templates. And then I think we're gonna have to break in groups. And then we'll just see how we might have to, we'll see how far we get. We'll reconvene at the end of it.
How are strategies prioritized? Because we got a lot of strategies. So, like, when it comes, I mean, they're gonna have to be prioritized to put into a time frame. How is that happening?
I think that this,
Through the breakout rooms and stuff?
to me, this process of action planning will help us with that, because
Okay.
it'll tell us, like, I think that.
Because there's probably some low hanging fruit that we'd be like, let's do that. 'Cause
Right.
we can check off some things, maybe. Fix the mapping, stuff like that, yeah.
That I think is
Okay.
gonna be, that should be part of our, like, I'm gonna print out one, we're gonna burn some paper here, but I'm gonna print out one for every single strategy. There'll probably be like one sheet or so, so it'll be a lot of sheets. We'll have them grouped by goal or by topic. And then I think the groups can pick the ones that they want to start with for the action planning thing. And that'll be, you can be like, okay, this is an easy one, we can get through this, or you might want to tackle something more complicated. But I think the prioritization happens when we start listing the activities and realize there's only 3 things we have to do on this one. And like, there isn't we don't need any funding. Like, we have the people to do it, and I think that'll help us prioritize.
Okay.
And then we will kind of work. That's torturous, going through that, so the paid people will do that. And then we'll bring it back to the group and you can validate or disagree with it at that point, I think. But it is important that we have everything on these templates, because I'm gonna print a bunch of them. Do you think we're covering all the ground here? What we're doing, who's responsible for doing it, the partners that are gonna help, how it's gonna, the ideas for getting paid for, and time frame?
I think there'll be a lot of blanks.
There'll be some blanks, yeah.
What about geography?
Where?
Yeah,
Yeah. I think you want to. Yeah.
yeah, that's good.
That might be blank for some of them, but there might be some like
There'll be a few.
Forest Service specific or, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good
land
one.
Land specific.
Okay.
And maybe that's not for every strategy, maybe that's.
No, but it is like, because it is,
Okay.
like, we don't have maps. We're not gonna be, this is, yeah, entirely template oriented, so. And this is the kind of thing where you might have a strategy for West Applies.
It just seems like that might help with prioritization.
Yeah, no,
And you could just say all, you know, if it's everywhere, it's all. If it's.
I have a question for the counties. So in light of what you all shared, would it make sense to visit with the counties after we've already got some of these action items, potential action items identified? Or does that feel like, oh, that's too far down the road? We wish we could have just heard about the goals and strategies first. I'm curious about the timing that feels right.
I mean, before and then also after you guys develop and so on.
Okay.
I don't think it would have to be one or the other. I think both would be great.
Yeah. And sorry, this, I'm a little bit ignorant, or I'm a lot ignorant on county process right now. Is the appropriate way to do that to, get in, to schedule during a commissioner's meeting, or is it to come and visit outside of a meeting?
No, get on the agenda, for the meeting. I mean, if there's gonna be a decision needs to be made, it would be during the regular meeting, or I mean, if we want a little more open-ended with discussion, a workshop.
Okay.
My experience would be the workshop first, just because it is open-ended, gives you a little bit more latitude for the person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we try to get on before we get too far down this road to
A workshop would be great.
come and visit with both counties for a workshop. Okay. Thank you so much.
with municipalities.
Same, okay.
So you think the first activity in any one of these is like, let's see if there's a project happening at the county or municipality level in the next year that fits in with X, Y, and Z that perhaps we could help fundraise for.
Yeah.
Right? And that way it's not coming to somebody with a baked plan saying, here's what we decided in Dolores the other day. It's more about like,
Some stuff may be more feasible for them on the county side than others. The earlier those conversations can happen, the better it worked out for them.
So what we'll have pretty quick here is the revised goals and strategies. And that's something that goes in the packet, right? Or is it just like a verbal, you think they get that as material?
They have that over there.
So you gotta have a week in advance or something like that to get that stuff to them. But that's kind of the cue, that this is on the agenda. And we just say big, bold letters, work in progress, goals and strategies. So everybody knows it's just drafted, the project's underway. Okay. I bet wrong on that. I told these guys you'd never want to do that, but
Oh, really?
I did. I've only been doing this 25 years, so sometimes I get it wrong.
Yeah, that's something good.
New experience for you.
I got that one wrong. Thanks a heck of a lot. No, that's good. That's great though, because it's a lot less pressure.
Right.
At that stage. We're not even done with this thing, you know, and like you were saying, it's like disclosure. We've been meeting long enough. It's time to like come out, get it right. So we'll have something share pretty soon. Not really necessarily controversial stuff.
Well, just out of clarification, now that sort of includes the stuff going to the public that you talked about earlier and the public throwing darts at it and putting holes on it. Is that, and I agree, that's a huge process. So going to your county commissioners before you've done that, and then you go to your public and say, or you survey them or whatever, and none of the goals and strategies match up. Is that, I just think that's something you gotta take into consideration. I don't have the right answer, but,
We've got to work with who we have to work with, within the organizations, within the county, within the state. So I think that being responsible and receptive to the commissioners in the workshop category for the first time makes sense. Then we go out with those changes or with those additions, then we have the public, then we probably come back to the commissioners again for another workshop before it ever goes to where it can be voted on. Iron out the last of those bugs, then we can come for the real meeting.
That'd be a good way to disseminate it out to the public.
But that's what I'm thinking, the public's gonna hear about this
Yeah.
3 weeks to Sunday.
no, I like that process. I'm just saying, identify that process before you can start.
And I think adding an action item when you're presenting to commissioners or any municipalities, like, oh, if you wanna know more, ta-da, right? So that
Yes.
the public can get that
Definitely a
information.
place where we can
Yeah.
refer people to.
Right.
And it is a public process.
That is, yeah, that's,
Yeah.
that's the
That's why it
nice thing
works.
about it. Two birds, one stone.
Yeah.
So go to the counties, the municipalities with the draft goals and strategies, maybe an example of just a template for the action, no?
I don't think they'd wanna see that
Right.
personally.
Way too much detail.
Okay,
That's too much
great,
detail.
thank you. And then once we get feedback from the counties and the municipalities, leave that in, then we go to the public.
Yeah.
Then we take what the public says, if we dare. And then we leave that in, we go back to the counties and the municipalities, and then we finalize.
I'm sure the counties municipalities will have public concern on their end too.
Yeah, right.
Right, well, I imagine so. Since I've been in this position, I've had a lot of people come up and talk to me and have questions and opinions and wanna know. I'm starting to learn that I need to leave more time every time I leave the house. And then don't go in my PJs. But thank you, county guys and municipality people for chiming in on that, because that was a piece of the puzzle that we weren't sure about. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's helpful.
Yeah,
great.
and then, I think just work directly with us, we can get things scheduled, because on my end, it takes a while.
Yeah, please, just let me know.
Okay.
Well, we'll know in the time frames, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that having a plan for what, being able to describe. You're correct that the elected leaders are gonna wanna know that there's some public involvement somewhere in this thing. So they're gonna wanna know how that's coming, or if you have any idea how it's gonna look, that's a good time to just tell them you're gonna do that.
Well, and also sharing the initial, I mean, there was a
That's what I
lot
was
of
gonna say.
public conversations prior to us even getting to this
Right.
point too, that
We've got
it
three.
wasn't us doing
Yeah.
this, it was.
Well, and as an organization, Nikki, we have at least 3 public outreaches under our belt recently, maybe more than that. So that doesn't hurt.
That's good, too. Yeah.
Probably include the United Youth Travel Council too. Something that I have to reach out to.
Beth could do that.
Thank you.
All right, well, we went over 4 minutes. Thank you all so much. We will see you April 15th for action planning.
That's another round.
Yes, hopefully in person.
I will not be in there, so have fun with the actions. I'm gonna ask you these questions, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not here for that.
Yeah.